Howdy! In this mini lecture we will discuss urbanization and sprawl. The student learning objectives of this mini lecture are: describe future trends of urbanization, describe what causes urbanization, define sprawl and urbanization, and evaluate the impacts of sprawl. When countries develop, they generally go through the demographic transition. This transition has occurred in European countries, the US, Japan, Canada, and several other developed countries over the past 200 to 300 years. It is not guaranteed that all developing countries will go through this exact model of development, but the general pattern that can be expected is that as countries industrialize, people tend to move from the rural areas of the country to the cities and suburbs. In fact, 2009 was the first time in human history that more people lived in cities and suburbs than in rural areas. This movement from the countryside to cities and towns is called urbanization. Urbanization is both a driver for and is driven by industrialization. Urbanization is driven by industrialization because industrialization reduces the need for farmers, thus sending people to the cities to look for work. Urbanization also leads to technology advancements that boost production, thus urbanization spurs more industrialization. Urban populations are growing rapidly. Since 1950, the world's urban population has multiplied about 5 times, while the rural population has yet to double in that time. Rapid growth in urbanization is fueled by general human population growth and movement of people from farms or rural areas to cities. As can be seen in this graph, in developed nations, urbanization, as well as population growth, has slowed and is predicted to stay steady. In this graph, the solid lines show past data, and the dashed lines indicate population growth projections. In contrast to developed nations, developing nations are urbanizing rapidly. This is because these countries are beginning to transition to an industrialized society, and thus people are moving from the farms to the cities more. Other factors contributing to the rapid urbanization occurring in developing nations are wars, conflicts, and ecological damage. The general pattern of development is that as families become more affluent, they move from the cities to the suburbs, which are the smaller communities that surround cities. In the mid-20th century in the U.S., there was a mass exodus from the cities to the suburbs. Specifically, between 1950 and 1990, the population of 58 U.S. metropolitan areas grew by 80%, but the land area they covered rose by 305%. A metropolitan area is a geographic area that includes a densely packed urban city center and the less populated suburbs surrounding it. The exodus to the suburbs was enabled by automobiles, more roads, and abundant cheap oil, business imported and exported resources, goods, waste. The U.S. government developed interstate highways, and suburbs delivered what people wanted, namely space, economic opportunities, cheaper real estate, lower crime rates, and better schools. But this mass exodus caused natural areas to disappear, cars to become mandatory, an increase in traffic jams, and the merging of cities and towns into massive metro areas. You probably have heard the term sprawl before and may have a preconceived notion of what it means, but you should know how the word sprawl is defined. Sprawl is the spread of low-density urban or suburban development outward from an urban center. You often hear the word urban sprawl, which is essentially the same thing. Sprawl is problematic for many reasons, but one of the key reasons is because people take up more space in suburban areas than they do in urban or city centers. This image shows what urban sprawl looks like over the course of decades. On the left is a picture of Las Vegas in 1984, and on the right is the same location in 2009. Between the time these two photos were taken, the population in developed areas of Las Vegas both tripled. If you live in one area long enough, you are very likely to see sprawl firsthand, as cities tend to continue to push out and develop more on the edges of the city, gradually making the footprint of the city larger and larger. Here's an image of several standard approaches to suburban development, each of which will likely result in sprawl and the required use of a motor vehicle by citizens. In the top left, you see an uncentered commercial strip development that consists of businesses built along one long road. The problem with this is that the businesses are far removed from the centralized community and city, and thus requires people to drive to visit the business. On the top right, you see a low-density single-use development, which is very common in the U.S. People who live in places like this have little option but to use their car to drive to work, school, business, or other places typical of everyday life. On the bottom left is a scattered or leapfrog development. While it may be appealing to the people living there that there are green spaces around them, these developments are built far away from city centers and often with little regard to how the area will develop in the future. Finally, in the bottom right, you see a sparse street network. The problem here is that the areas between the developments is oddly shaped and not conducive for future development, and the areas that are undeveloped are not big enough to effectively function as natural areas or recreational areas. So why is sprawl a problem? To begin, all of the previously displayed geographic arrangements of homes and businesses, and other examples of sprawl not shown here, in general lack planning and further reinforce the reliance on cars. Sprawl also makes it difficult to incorporate mass transit options such as light rail. Sprawl causes pollution because it promotes the use of motor vehicles. This leads to emissions from carbon dioxide and nitrogen and sulfur compounds. This in turn causes smog, acid precipitation, and tropospheric ozone pollution. Tropospheric ozone is harmful to our health and is different from the stratospheric ozone. We will discuss this later in the semester. Pollution also comes from motor oil and other pollutants on city streets that get into streams and ponds through stormwater runoff. Sprawl is detrimental to our physical health in other ways. It promotes physical inactivity and consequently gaining unnecessary weight because we rely on our cars. Studies have shown that people from the largest sprawled areas in the U.S. are on average 6 pounds heavier and have higher blood pressure than people from areas that don't have as much sprawl. Inevitably, sprawl will change land use because we tear down forests, remove farms and ranches, and change other natural areas to expand cities and housing developments. It's estimated that we convert 2.5 million acres of agricultural land and forested land to suburban areas each year. Sprawl also strains local economies because instead of spending tax dollars on maintaining existing areas or revitalizing areas a bit downtrodden, cities spend money expanding roads and other city services to the outliers of the city. For example, a study comparing sprawl versus compact development in Virginia found that if the city of Virginia Beach did not pursue compact development, it would spend 81% more money on infrastructure and operation costs would be 3.7 times greater. That concludes this mini lecture on urbanization and sprawl. Please review the weekly outline and complete the activities for this week per the schedule set forth in the outline. Thanks and gig 'em!